50 years ago, Logan's Run imagined a world where turning 30 meant your life was over. No future. No second act. No growing older with dignity. And maybe that is exactly why the film still lingers. Because half a century later, the cast of Logan's Run tells a very different story. A story of people who lived beyond the fear the film was built on. Who loved, struggled, endured, disappeared, returned, and in some cases left behind legacies deeper than anyone could have guessed in 1976. So this is not only a then and now video. It is a look back at a movie that feared aging, and at the real lives that quietly proved aging was never the end of the story at all. And there was no better place to begin than with the man who carried the film on his shoulders. Michael York was the face of Logan's Run. He played Logan 5, a man running from a future that gave him no right to grow old. On screen, he was escaping death at 30. But looking back now, that role feels even more haunting. Because Michael York's real life would go on to tell a very different story. The actor who once played a youth on the run went on to live far beyond the fear that defined the film. And in many ways, his life became the first quiet answer to the question Logan's Run asked so long ago. What really happens after youth is over? For Michael York, the answer was not disappearance. It was endurance. It was a reinvention. And it was the steady unfolding of a life and career that continued long after the world of the dome. By the time Logan's Run arrived, York was already a major presence in international cinema. He had the elegance of a classic leading man, but also a sensitivity that made him feel more thoughtful than many stars of his era. And maybe that is why he remains so memorable. He never felt loud. He never felt forced. He felt intelligent, restrained, and quietly romantic. Later, younger audiences would rediscover him through Austin Powers, which only deepened the irony. The man who once played a character racing against age became proof that a career can survive changing decades and changing audiences. It may not always look the way people first expected, but it can continue. And for older viewers, that matters. Because Michael York's story is not about staying young. It is about staying present. But Michael York was only one half of the film's emotional center. For many viewers, the memory of Logan's Run is inseparable from Jenny Agutter. And that is where the story becomes softer, warmer, and more personal. Jenny Agutter was never simply the beautiful young woman running beside Logan. By the time Logan's Run arrived, she had already touched audiences through The Railway Children and Walkabout. She was already loved, already remembered, already carrying that rare combination of innocence, intelligence, and emotional warmth that makes a performer feel close, even decades later. That is one reason people still respond to her so strongly. She did not seem manufactured. She did not seem cold. She felt real. Even in a futuristic story, Jenny brought a gentleness that grounded the film. She gave it heart. She gave it tenderness. She made Jessica feel less like a symbol and more like a person. And as time passed, that feeling only deepened. Her career moved through acclaimed work, later television success, and a graceful second life with audiences who came to know her in very different eras. That is part of what makes her story especially meaningful to older women. She did not remain frozen in youth. She matured into something even more beautiful, grace. Not flashy grace. Not glamorous reinvention. But the quieter kind. The kind that comes from aging without losing softness, intelligence, and dignity. If Michael York gives the film its irony, Jenny Agutter gives it its emotional memory. But Logan's Run was never only about beauty and escape. It also needed danger. That is where Richard Jordan enters. As Francis VII, Richard Jordan brought something colder and sharper into the film. He was not merely chasing Logan. He represented the certainty of a system that believed it had the right to decide when life should end. That is what made him unsettling. He did not feel reckless. He felt convinced. And certainty can be more frightening than anger. Looking back now, Richard Jordan's real life carries its own kind of ache. He was a serious actor with depth, education, and authority. He built a career that suggested his later years might have been especially rich. That is what makes his story so sad. Because he feels like one of those actors who still has more to give. Then illness interrupted that future. And suddenly, a man who already carried gravity on screen became part of the film's deepest irony. In a movie about dying too young, Richard Jordan's life reminds us that sometimes the cruelest version of that idea is not science fiction at all. It is real. If Richard Jordan brings the story into the territory of loss, Peter Ustinov brings it into the territory of meaning. Peter Ustinov may have played the oldest man in Logan's run, but what he really brought to the film was perspective. In a world terrified of growing old, his character stands like a challenge to the entire system. He is not young, he is not polished, he is not trying to fit the rules of the dome, and that is exactly why he matters. The old man is proof that the world inside the film has built itself on a lie. What if age is not emptiness? What if memory is not a weakness? What if a long life is not the enemy, but the reward? That is what Peter Ustinov brings into the movie. And outside the film, he embodied that same truth. He was a man of wit, intelligence, culture, and astonishing breadth. His life was full, and that makes his presence in Logan's Run feel even more profound in hindsight. Because the actor playing the one truly old man in the story was, in real life, someone who made age look rich rather than diminished. For many older women watching, this may be one of the deepest emotional turns in the entire video. Because Peter Ustinov quietly reveals what the world of Logan's Run could never understand. Age is not the end of value. Age can be humorous. Age can be wisdom. Age can be memory. Age can be fullness. And then, in one of the strangest turns in the cast's history, the film gives us someone whose role is tiny, but whose life becomes enormous. That story belongs to Farrah Fawcett. In Logan's Run, Farrah is barely there, a small role, a passing face, a flicker of beauty in a world already obsessed with youth and image. And maybe that is what makes her story so powerful in this context. Because if any cast member came to embody the worship of youth in American culture, it was Farrah Fawcett. The beauty, the image, the sudden mythology. She became more than an actress. She became a symbol. And that is why her story works as the emotional high point. Because no one in this cast dramatizes the tension between beauty and time more powerfully than she does. At first, the youth made her famous. But it was not youth that made her unforgettable. What made her unforgettable was what came after. She wanted more than an image. She wanted to be taken seriously. And later, when illness stripped away all the old language people had used to define her, what remained was something stronger than beauty. Courage. Not the glossy kind. Not the poster kind. But the kind that appears when life becomes painful and real. That is why Farrah Fawcett belongs at the emotional center of the second half of this video. Because she turns the whole meaning of the film upside down. A movie obsessed with youth produced, in one of its smallest cast members, a woman whose deepest public meaning arrived after youth, after glamour, and after illusion. And after a high point like that, the story needs room to breathe. Michael Anderson Jr. is the cast member many viewers remember least, and perhaps that is exactly why he belongs near the end. Because not every life after a film becomes a legend. Not every actor becomes a myth. Some simply move on. There is something surprisingly moving about that in a story like this. Because by then, we have seen fame, illness, reinvention, prestige, and grief. What Michael Anderson Jr. gives us is something softer. He gives us continuation. Not the most dramatic continuation. Not the most glamorous continuation. Just life continuing. And in a film obsessed with what happens after 30, that quiet continuation feels strangely perfect. Some cast members became icons. Some became tragedies. Some became symbols of resilience. And some simply kept living. That, too, is a human ending. And maybe that is the deepest irony of all. A film built around the fear of life after 30 ended up leaving behind a cast whose real lives proved something much richer. They loved. They endured. They succeeded. They suffered. They changed. They kept going. And in doing so, they revealed something the film itself only began to ask. What if life after youth is not the end of the story, but the part that matters most? Before you go, my name is Daniel Carter, and this is Celebs Before and After. A quiet place where we look back at the stars we once loved and discover how time, memory, and real life gave their stories even deeper meaning. If this episode brought back memories of Logan's run, or made you reflect on how differently a story can feel after 50 years, I would truly love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. Which part stayed with you the most? The cast? The memories of the film? Or the reminder that life after youth is not the end of the story, but often the part that matters most? Your reflections, your memories, and your perspective help make this channel a more thoughtful and meaningful place for everyone here. If this episode meant something to you, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on the notification bell. Thank you for staying until the end. And now, maybe it is time to leave the dome behind for a moment, take a quiet breath, and remember. Time not only takes things away. Sometimes, it reveals what mattered all along. I'll see you in the next episode.